24. Fanny Bloomfield Zeisler. The scope of piano technique. Each year, as Madame Bloomfield Zeisler plays for us, we feel the growth of a deeper experience, a clearer insight into human nature, a broader outlook and grasp on art and life. Such a mentality, ever seeking for truth and the sincerest expression of it, must continually progress until, as now, the greatest heights are reached. Madame Zeisler is no keyboard dreamer, no rhapsodist on art. She is a thoroughly practical musician, able to explain as well as demonstrate, able to talk as well as play. Out of the fullness of a rich experience, out of the depth of deepest sincerity and conviction the artist speaks, as she plays, with authority and enthusiasm. The first thing to be done for a pupil is to see that the hand is in correct position. I explained that the wrist should be about on a level with the second joint of the middle finger when the fingers are properly rounded. The knuckles will then be somewhat elevated. In fact, they will naturally take care of themselves, other points of the hand being correct. Two things are of supreme importance, namely, firm finger joints and loose wrists. These must be insisted on from the very beginning. I sometimes use firm wrists in my own playing, if I wish to make a certain effect, but I can safely affirm, I think, that no one has ever seen me play with weak, bending fingers. What technique includes? Piano technique includes so much. Everything goes into it: arithmetic, grammar, diction, language study, poetry, history, and painting. In the first stages there are rules to be learned, just as in any other study. In school we had to learn the rules of grammar and mathematics. Just such rules are applicable to musical performance. I must know the rules of versification in order to scan poetic stanzas, so I must know the laws of rhythm and meter to be able to punctuate musical phrases and periods. Pupils who have long passed the stage of division and fractions do not seem able to determine the time values of the various notes and groups of notes used in music. They do not know what must be done with triplets, dotted notes, and so on. So you see, just technique includes a multitude of things. It is a very wide subject. Each pupil a different problem. Each pupil presents a different problem as to physical formation of hand and body, intelligence and talent. Those who are the most talented do not always prove the most satisfactory students. They grasp the composer's ideas quickly enough, it is true, so that sometimes in a few days, they can take up a difficult composition and clash it off with such showy effect as to blind the eyes of the superficial listener. But these students are not willing to work out the fine points of the piece and polish it artistically. Neither are they willing to get right down to the bedrock of technique and work at that seriously and thoroughly. If this course is suggested, they grow restive, think they are being held back, and sometimes prefer to study with a more superficial teacher. The consequence is they never really amount to anything, whereas if these same players possessed perseverance along with their talent, they could become great artists. I would rather have an intelligent, earnest, serious pupil who is obedient and willing to work than a very gifted pupil. The two seldom go together. When you find both in one person, a marvelous musician is the result, if assisted by the right sort of training. Harmony study. One thing a teacher should insist upon, and that is that the pupil should study harmony. He should have a practical working knowledge of keys, chords, and progressions. There may be no need for him to study orchestration or composition, but he must know the foundation and structure of the material of music. My pupil must be familiar with the various chords of the scale and know how to analyze them before I can make clear to him the rules of pedaling. Without this knowledge, my words about the use of the pedals are as so much Greek to him. He must go and learn this first, before coming to me. According to rule. Experience counts for much with the teacher, but much more with the pianist. The beginner must go according to rule until he has thoroughly mastered the rules. He must not think because he sees a great artist holding his hands a certain way at times, turning under his unemployed fingers for octaves perhaps, or any other seeming eccentricity, that he himself is at liberty to do the same things. No, he must learn to play in a normal, safe way before attempting any tricks. What may seem eccentric to the inexperienced student may be quite a legitimate means of producing certain effects to the mature artist, who through wide experience and study knows just the effect he wants and the way to make it. The artist does many things the pupil should not attempt. The artist knows the capabilities of his own hand. His technique is, in a certain sense, individual. It should not be imitated by the learner of little or no experience. If I play a chord passage with high wrist, that I may bring out a certain effect or quality of tone at that point, the thoughtless student might be under the impression that a high wrist was habitual with me, which is not true. For this reason, I do not give single lessons to anyone, nor coach on single pieces. In the case of the interpretation of a piece, a student can get the ideas of it from hearing it in recital, if he can grasp and assimilate them. On interpretation. Interpretation. That is a wide subject. How can it be defined? I try to arouse the imagination of the student first of all. We speak of the character of the piece and try to arrive at some idea of its meaning. Is it largo? Then it is serious and soulful. Is it scherzo? Then it should be blithe and gay. We cannot depend on metronome tempi, for they are not reliable. Those given in Schumann are generally all wrong. We try to feel the rhythm of the music, the swing of it, the spirit of it. In giving out the opening theme or subject, I feel it should be made prominent, to arrest attention, to make it clear to the listener. When it appears at other times in the piece, it can be softened or varied. Variety of effect we must have, but whether a passage is played with decreasing or increasing tone, whether this run is soft and the next loud, or vice versa, does not matter so much as to secure variety and individuality. I may look at it one way, another player an opposite way. One should be broad-minded enough to see the beauty of each interpretation. I do not expect my pupils to copy me or do things just as I do them. I show them how I do it, then leave them to work it out as they see it. Pianissimo is one of the later things to teach. A beginner should not attempt it too soon, for then it will only result in flabbiness. A true pianissimo is not the result of weakness, but of strength. Musical conditions in America. America has made marvelous progress in the understanding and appreciation of music. Even the critics, many of them, know a great deal about music. The audiences, even in small towns, are a pleasure and delight to play to. I am asked sometimes why I attempt the last sonata of Beethoven in a little town. But just such audiences listen to that work with rapt attention. They hang on every note. How are they to learn what is best in music unless we are willing to give it to them? The trouble with America is that it does not at all realize how much it knows, how much talent is here. We are so easily tricked with a foreign name and title. Our serious and talented musicians are constantly being pushed to the wall by some unknown with a name ending in ski. These are the people who tour America, for one season at least, who get the best places in our music schools and colleges, crowding out our native musicians. It makes me very bitter against this utterly mistaken and fallacious idea of ours. I have many talented students who come to me from all over the country. Some of them become most excellent concert artists. If I recommend them to managers or institutions, should not my word count for something? Ought I not to know what my students can do, and what is required of a concert artist? But instead of their securing an engagement, with such a recommendation, a foreigner with the high-sounding name is the one invariably chosen. When I first started on my career, I endeavored in every way to get a proper hearing in America. But not until I had made a name for myself in Europe was I recognized here, in my own land. All honor to those who are now fighting for the musical independence of America. A group of questions. Not long after the above conversation with Madame Zeisler, I jotted down some questions, leading to further elucidation of her manner of teaching and playing, and sent them to her. The artist was then fully occupied with her long and arduous tours and later went to Europe. My questions remained unanswered for nearly a year. When she next played in New York, she sent for me to come to her hotel. As she entered the room to greet me, she held in her hand the paper containing the questions. I expressed surprise that she had preserved the bit of paper so long. "I am very conscientious," she answered. "I have kept this ever since you sent it, and now we will talk over the topics you suggest. 1. What means do you favor for gaining power?" I can say none. There is no necessity for using special means to acquire power. When everything is right, you will have sufficient power. You cannot help having it. If you know the piece thoroughly, your fingers have acquired the necessary strength through efficient practice, so that when the time comes to make the desired effects, you have the strength to make them, provided everything is as it should be with your technique. Power is a comparative term at best. One pianist may play on a larger scale than another. I am reminded of an amusing incident in this connection. My son Paul, when a little fellow, was fond of boasting about his mother. I could not seem to break him of it. One day he got into an argument with another boy who asserted that his father, an amateur pianist, could play better than Paul's mother because he could play louder. Anyway, I don't know whether they fought it out or not, but my boy told me about the dispute afterward. "What do you think makes a great player?" I asked him. "If you play soft enough and loud enough, slow enough and fast enough, and it sounds nice," was his answer. It is the whole thing in a nutshell, and he was such a little fellow at the time. As I said, you must have everything right with your technique, then both power and velocity will come almost unconsciously. 2. What do you do for weak finger joints? They must be made strong at once. When a new pupil comes to me, the first thing we do is to get the hand into correct position and the fingers rounded and firm. If the pupil is intelligent and quick, this can be accomplished in a few weeks. Sometimes it takes several months. But it must be done. Of what use is it to attempt a Beethoven sonata when the fingers are so weak that they cave in? The fingers must keep their rounded position and be strong enough to bear up under the weight you put upon them. As you say, this work can be done at a table, but I generally prefer the keyboard. Wood is so unresponsive. I think, for this work, children are easier to handle than their elders. They have no faults to correct. They like to hold their hands well and make them look pretty. They ought to have a keyboard adapted to their little delicate muscles, with action much less heavy than 2 ounces, the minimum weight of the clavier. As they grow and gain strength, the weight can be increased. If they should attempt to use my instrument with its heavy action, they would lame the hand in a few moments, or their little fingers could not stand up under the weight. 3. Do you approve of finger action? Most emphatically. Finger action is an absolute essential in playing the piano. We must have finger development. As you say, we can never make the fingers equal in themselves. We might practice 500 years without rendering the 4th finger as strong as the thumb. Rather, let us learn to so adjust the weight and pressure of each finger that all will sound equal whenever we wish them to do so. I tell my pupils that in regard to strength, their fingers are in this relation to each other, and the pianist drew with her pencil 4 little upright lines on the paper, representing the relative natural weight of the 4 fingers. The 5th finger, she said, figures very little in scale or passage playing. By correct methods of study, the pupil learns to lighten the pressure of the stronger fingers and proportionately increase the weight of the weaker fingers. 4. Do you approve of technique practice outside of pieces? I certainly do. The amount of time given to technique study varies with the pupil's stage of advancement. In the beginning, the whole 4 hours must be devoted to technique practice. When some degree of facility and control have been attained, the amount may be cut down to 2 hours. Later, 1 hour is sufficient, and when one is far advanced, a very short time will suffice to put the hand in trim. Some rapid, brilliant arpeggios, or an etude with much finger work may be all that is necessary. The player gains constantly in strength and technical control while studying pieces, provided correct methods are pursued. Every piece is first of all a study in technique. The foundation must be rightly laid. The principles can then be applied to etude and piece. 5. What do you consider the most vital technical points? That is a difficult question, involving everything about piano playing. There are the scales of all kinds, in single and double notes. Arpeggios are of great importance because, in one form or another, they constantly occur. Octaves, chords, pedaling, and so on. The trill, too, I suggested. Yes, the trill, but after all, the trill is a somewhat individual matter. Some players seem to have it naturally, or have very little trouble with it. Others always have more or less difficulty. They do not seem able to play a rapid, even trill. Many are unable to finish it off deftly and artistically. They can trill for a certain number of repetitions. When they become accustomed to the monotonous repetition, it is not so easy to go into the ending without a break. 6. What means do you advise to secure velocity? I make the same answer to this question that I made to the first: none. I never work for velocity, nor do I work up velocity. That is a matter that generally takes care of itself. If you know the piece absolutely, know what it means and the effects you want to make, there will be little difficulty in getting over the keys at the tempo required. Of course, this does not apply to the pupil who is playing wrong, with weak fingers, uncertain touch, and all the rest of the accompanying faults. I grant that these faults may not be so apparent in a piece of slow tempo. A pupil may be able to get through Handel's Largo, for instance. Though his fingers are uncertain, he can make the theme sound halfway respectable, while a piece in rapid tempo will be quite beyond him. The faults were in the Largo just the same, but they did not show. Rapid music reveals them at once. Certain composers require almost a perfect technical equipment in order to render their music with adequate effect. Mozart is one of these. Much of his music looks simple and is really quite easy to read, but to play it as it should be played is another thing entirely. I seldom give Mozart to my pupils. Those endless scales, arpeggios, and passages, which must be flawless, in which you dare not blur or miss a single note. To play this music with just the right spirit, you must put yourself en rapport with the epoch in which it was written, the era of crinoline, powdered wigs, snuff boxes, and mincing minuets. I don't mean to say Mozart's music is not emotional. It is filled with it, but it is not the emotion of today, but of yesterday, of more than a century back. For myself, I love Mozart's music. One of my greatest successes was in a Mozart concerto with the Chicago Orchestra. I afterward remarked to one of my colleagues that it had been one of the most difficult tasks I had ever accomplished. Yes, when one plays Mozart one is so exposed, was his clever rejoinder. 7. How do you keep repertoire in repair? If you mean my own, I would answer that I don't try to keep all my pieces up, for I have hundreds and hundreds of them, and I must always save time to study new works. A certain number are always kept in practice, different programs, according to the requirements of the hour. My method of practice is to play slowly through the piece, carefully noting the spots that are weak and need special treatment. To these I give a certain number of repetitions, and then repeat the whole to see if the weak places are equal in smoothness to the rest. If not, they must have more study. But always slow practice. Only occasionally do I go through the piece at the required velocity. My pupils are always counseled to practice slowly. If they bring the piece for a first hearing, it must be slowly and carefully played. If for a second or third hearing, and they know it well enough to take it up to time, they can play it occasionally at this tempo before coming to me. But to constantly play a piece in rapid tempo is very harmful. It precludes all thought of analysis of how you are doing it. When you are playing at concert speed, you have no time to think of fingering, movement, or condition. You are beyond all that. It is only in slow practice that you have time and opportunity to think of everything. As an illustration, take the case of a pianist in a traveling concert company. He must play the same pieces night after night, with no opportunity to practice between. For the first few days the pieces go well, then small errors and weak spots begin to appear. There is no time for slow practice, so each nightly repetition increases the uncertainty. In a few months his playing degenerates, so it is hardly fit to listen to. This is the result of constant fast playing. 8. How do you keep technique up to the standard? If one is far advanced, a few arpeggios and scales, or a brilliant etude will put the hand in condition. After one has rested or had a vacation, some foundational exercises and finger movements may be necessary to limber up the muscles and regain control and quickness. One may often have to review first principles, but technical facility is soon regained if it has once been thoroughly acquired. If one has stopped practice for quite a period, the return is slower and needs to be more carefully prepared. I use considerable Czerny for technical purposes with my pupils. Op. 299, of course, and even earlier or easier ones, then Op. 740. A few of the latter are most excellent for keeping up one's technique. The Chopin studies, too, are daily bread. 9. The best way to study chords? From the wrist and with fingers of steel, small hands must of course begin with smaller positions. 10. What gymnastic exercises do you suggest? Whatever seems necessary for the special hand. Tight hands need to be massaged to limber the fingers and stretch the web of flesh between them. The loose, flabby hand may also be strengthened and rendered firm by massage, but this is often a more difficult task than to stretch the right hand. If technical training is properly given, it is sure to render the hand flexible and strong.